Ex-prisoners of Reddit. What was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? There was talk about a guy assaulting his own daughter. Some guys made him a cup of morning coffee. Morning coffee is basically taking a kettle, pour cooking oil in it, heat it up and add a lot of sugar and then throw it in someone's face. It was very uncomfortable to see and hear. Edit. Whoa. First comment to really blow up like this. Not prison but jail. 6 months pregnant and her water broke. COs didn't believe her and waited to take her to the hospital until she was hemorrhaging. The baby died and the woman was released because they didn't want to pay medical costs. This was 2004-ish. I worked in the medical department of a large prison in Florida. We had an inmate bite a bigger inmate's nose off. The tip. The bigger guy kept asking the kid for hanky-panky and the kid had enough. We saw several stabbings. Several were life-flighted out. But those weren't the most interesting. We had an inmate smoke some bad spice. Made out of God knows what. He came to medical out of his mind and later died because it caused brain hemorrhaging. One guy got a dislocated patella and was just sitting patiently as I got his info. I asked if it hurt and he said yeah. I asked how he was so chill and he replied, "Because I'm not a bitch." I spent 8 years in prison. In the state of Georgia. There was a guy who made a hustle of holding or hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. I've never been to prison but my cousin did and he came back out all sorts of messed up. He was arrested for drugs. According to him, he spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement. For his safety. He said that his first couple of months there were okay, as far as prison goes. But that one day, for whatever reason, some guy who had been kept separate from the general population was accidentally put with the rest of the prisoners, unsupervised, and that a few prisoners grabbed the guy and that they stomped on his elbows and legs to break them before they sodomized him with some shivs. My cousin said that those guys did it all in an instant and that they threatened him if he snitched. My cousin was later interviewed by some of the guards before they took the guys who did this, and so some thought that he had snitched. He says that he didn't. But that didn't matter because the guards had put him in solitary for safety and was eventually kept there 4 months longer. Because he wouldn't snitch, so they tried to accuse him of being an accomplice. My uncle was in for 17 years for marijuana related charges. He was in a ward with 2 other guys with the same name as him. Both of them in for 7 years. One of them killed a guy and the other was a child molester. One day when my uncle was in the showers, a group of guys who mistaken him as a child molester were about to serve prison justice on the wrong guy. He quickly realized the situation. Sprinted naked out the showers to grab his papers to show the guys they have the wrong dude. Seeing someone on the threes jump to his death. Just missing PPL on the deck. I saw a guy get in a fight with his cousin over a 50-cent bowl. This escalated more and more until they starting fighting. We all kinda watched out the corner of our eyes. BC it was in the cell while the doors were open. Well, the guy that was pissed about the bowl grabbed the dude by the hair and bite a huge hunk of his cousin's eyebrow off. Like about half of it. If that wasn't bad enough, me and my cellmate moved into the cell. BC it was further away from the TV. So we are cleaning up the cell and my cellmate goes, "Holy frick, look at this." He lifts up what I thought was a dead hairy bug. Nope. Furry ass eyebrow and skin. Doesn't haunt me. Just crazy to think a guy lost half an eyebrow over a fricking 50-cent bowl. I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month in, I watched a Crip on Crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60 plus times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help, but nobody could because he'd be a target next. He somehow survived, but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by two others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had came in with a parcel. Drugs. This was in the communal showers, so yeah, addicts don't give a frick. Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard. Dry it out in the sun. Sharpen it down to a point on the concrete and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. I spent 2 weeks awaiting trial in Johannesburg Central Prison. Saw a guy with mental issues get severely beaten one night after he attacked another inmate. Saw another guy have a kettle of boiling water poured over him another evening after an argument with another prisoner. In both cases the wardens did nothing until the following morning. I was lucky. I managed to avoid any issues while I was there. Overall a crappy experience. 0/10. Would not recommend. It's not the craziest thing I saw, but it's a social norm in prison that goes on daily. I'll never forget how socially acceptable jackers were. Like somebody would be wearing a coat or hoodie etc and stare at a female CO and jack off. Sometimes sitting on a bench. Sometime the TV room. And nobody bats an eye. One time a dude was like, "Hey man, can you move a row over?" She know I'm watching and didn't skip a beat, cranking off to an ugly 60-something-year-old woman. It's rigged up, but after a while you just accept that some people went nuts in there. I remember people kinda turned on each other out of boredom. I mean, you made friends and all, but you had it hanging over you that you were a bad guy. And some people took to being assholes and provoked others seemingly out of boredom. It was an unpleasant situation to be on the other side. Because you wanted to stay out of trouble too. But at the same time had to stand up for yourself. Maybe not the absolute worst I saw, but something I remember. Saw a dude get his face turned to hamburger over a card game. Dude lost, so he sucker punches the guy across from him a minute later. Gets in top of him. And probably get about 10 hits in by the time the CO broke it up. Blood everywhere. I was like, holy frick. It was like my first month there and it made me kinda not wanna leave the cell. My bunkie was a blood and jacked. He's like, dude, nobody will frick with you. I'm like, okay, I hope not. I'm pretty sure he smashed his eye socket in edit. Holy poop, I didn't expect this many upvotes lol. I did a year spread out over a few 2 yards in AZ. Low level yards. I didn't see much that really shocked me. I'd been on the street prior to being locked up, so anything I saw happen in prison was more of the same really. There were fights. And people catching heat from their own people for fricking up and breaking rules. But for the most part it was fairly tame. I think the part that sticks with me the most is the amount of very clearly mentally ill people who were locked up with me. But were getting no help whatsoever. I mean, none of us were really getting any help. But some of these guys were clearly going to have no option when they left except to go back to what they were doing. To me, that was the worst thing I saw, the absolute apathy of the system as a whole. I was incarcerated with 1,200 other inmates on 1 yard in Tuscan. In a complex that had, I believe, 7 or 8 other yards on it. This is of course one of many complexes in AZ. This also came as a shock to me when I really thought about it, just the incredible amount of people being locked up. Most of the people I did time with were in for non-violent, drug-related offenses. While not prison and certainly tame by comparison. The worst thing I saw in jail was refusal to allow people to use the restroom. We, 6 of us, were all waiting 12 hours for processing in a small town in NC and were put in a concrete cell with a toilet. Every time we stood up to use the toilet, an officer would yell at us to sit back down. For those who disobeyed, they were forcibly handcuffed and moved somewhere else, often pissing themselves during the ordeal. Editing to add some detail and hopefully answer some questions I've seen in the comments, I was a first year in college going to Campbell University. I was arrested and taken to the Harnett County Jail, where I was eventually served an ex parte restraining order. That order was thrown out less than a month later. But charges pending existed on my record 4 years after until I could get it expunged, which cost me quite a few jobs. Not a prisoner but worked in a prison clinic for a few weeks while in med school. Was under the mentorship of the prison GP. Had this one guy come into the clinic for a routine visit who had a colostomy. We did our physical. Blah blah. And the guy was about to leave. The GP mentoring me said, "Hey, check out his colostomy real quick." The guy awkwardly peeled part of his bag off and he has these red blisters weeping fluid around his colostomy stoma. I was totally confused and the guy left super quick. GP just shrugged. Later that day, I asked the GP what was up. Apparently the other prisoners fricked that guy's colostomy hole. And he had gotten herpes of the colostomy from the other prisoners. Haunts me to this day. I was in a prison that was split. One side was a level 4 facility, just under max, and the other was for mentally ill inmates. One day they decided to move some of their more stable mentally ill patients to our side. The level 4 side. There was this really huge dude who, as soon as he got to our prison, just started screaming that he wanted to go back. He turned and found the person closest to him. I was down the hallway from him, and he proceeds to beat the hell out of this random dude. Dude went into a coma and died 2 days later. It was horrifying to watch this blatant display of random violence that ended with someone dead. I won't ever forget it. Saw this in a similar post. Some guy was doing a 2-year stretch for something. Anyway, he was laying awake his first night when he heard the microwave. He didn't think much of it and ignored it. Then a few minutes later he hears this blood-curdling scream. Apparently the guy using the microwave heated up a tub of Vaseline to boiling point, then he pours it on some guy's face. I think it was revenge for the guy talking smack about him. Not prison, but county jail. I was doing 90 days and a woman who was very pregnant went into labor. They refused to take her to the hospital until her contractions were 2 minutes apart. When they finally did, they shackled her to the bed. They refused to unlock the shackles even when the baby was in danger. She lost the baby and almost bled out. She was in jail for traffic tickets. Dudes thinking no one notices their bedsheets ruffling during lights out. A guy get his face beaten by a dude with a cast on his arm because guy took dude's ketchup pack off his plate on hot dog day. Cool story. I was a small-time criminal in my youth. Got locked up for some weed for the weekend. I never experienced much kindness that I could remember from people, but I did in jail. I couldn't use the bathroom in my cell because I was too scared and these guys started talking to me and distracting me so I could go. It was the strangest and coolest thing I'd ever seen. Been intrigued by behavior ever since. There was a guy I was locked up with in Baldwin County. Al, who went into our block's common area library, just a bookshelf with about 50-60 books, and ripped out the last chapter of every single freaking book. I was never in prison, but I spent a lot of time in county jail and I can tell you it is disturbing. I am a woman and most COs are men. Every night at walkthrough after you are in your cell, certain guards used to have girls they liked and would come up to your window and say change your strip. They would stand there and wait for you to take your clothes off. You might get some gum or a cigarette from it, but still that's disgusting. And one time my pod was in trouble for having a party, so they withheld our toiletries for over a month. Not exactly prison, but how about being laughed at when asked to show a guard that your molar just broke in half with one part in your hand and the other profusely bleeding? I'll ask the dentist for an emergency visit, paperwork came back for a visit in 6 months. Frick, Fresno County Jail. I was a prison guard. Briefly. At an all-male prison in Virginia. It didn't suit me. I don't have enough testosterone. I guess. I just didn't like the entire process. I also couldn't get used to walking around on my own with 180 men when I did rounds. The men were loose, just walking around watching. The stares were penetrating. If any of those guys grabbed me, I had no gun, no mace, nothing. And Virginia prisons will never negotiate with prisoners for the sake of a hostage. I'd have been screwed. It messes with your head a bit. But I still did it. Yeah. The food's gross. But the place was clean. The worst day for me was when one of the guards blew his brains out in the watchtower. He was in his early 20s. No, an ex-prisoner, but I was in a holding cell for a few hours. Long story involving alcohol and fighting outside a pub. By out, an older man was having a stroke. His pained cries for help were met with "shut the frick up or I'll give you a rein to need help, and I'm sick of hearing you. He lived, has some pretty bad brain damage." One of the officers never returned to that line of work.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.